Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. And of course, I'm your host, John June. And I got a special guest with me today, a fantasy football and injury analyst. He does some work with his brother behind, also behind the scenes. I guess his brother Derek is. But I'm talking about my guy, Marcel Boudreau. Marcel, brother, welcome on, man, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. No, I'm super excited to be here, and I'm just taking these for blessings, so I appreciate it very much for having me on the show.
No, absolutely, man. We were talking off air, but we obviously know how we met through a fantasy startup, and apparently I was irking your nerves a little bit with the sniping players from you, but we were DMing about it, and you were like, hey, I see you're doing this series. Do you have a Raiders fan? And I was like, well, actually, I don't have a Raiders fan. So this just kind of worked out perfectly. We've kind of just been hitting it off since, Marcel. So we're obviously going to talk about your Las Vegas Raiders now. They finished 8-8 in 2020, second place in the AFC West after a 7-9 finish in 2019. There were some rumors about them potentially moving on from Derek Carr, but that obviously, has not happened. That's been going on for 2 years now, it seems. They made the decision to move on from, big name players on their offensive line, though, in Trent Brown, Gabe Jackson, Rodney Hudson. They brought in Kenyon Drake to back up Josh Jacobs, which seemed like kind of a head scratcher to most people, but they haven't been very good on defense over the years either. Especially since Gruden's got there. And so they continue to try to fill these holes, there, whether it's through coaching or personnel, as they did add, I believe, Jack Del Rio to be the defensive coordinator, or just
Gus Bradley, actually.
Gus Bradley. Yeah. Sorry. He's replacing Jack Del Rio. That's what it was. Got it. Marcel, I have to ask you, what are the expectations for the Raiders as they head into 2021?
It's a really good question because I came into the offseason kind of a little discouraged on last season because we started the season 7-3 and then we finished 1-5 to finish the season. So we were looking like we were going to lock in a playoff spot, at least a wild card spot, and from there, looking at what's happened over the summer, I've questioned a lot of the moves, but I'm starting to come around on them. I'm not going to lie. I'm really starting to come around on them. Is it okay, if I start this with the defense side of the ball and then kind of get into the fantasy and the offensive implications?
Absolutely, of course, man. Let's do it. Football show.
Yeah, no, for sure. So when I talk about the defense, like you had mentioned, you talked about a lot of points I'm going to hit on. Is the Raiders were horrible last year. They ranked 30th in the league in defense. And they fired Paul Guenther, and then hired Gus Bradley. So if you look over the last 3 seasons since they had John Gruden, they ranked 30th last year, 24th the year before that, and dead last in 2018. So obviously they have not been good since the Gruden hire, but I think Gus Bradley brings a lot. He has a phenomenal resume. I mean, he was defensive coordinator for Seattle from 2009 to 2012, and from there, he created a defense so great that Jacksonville just picked him up as a head coach for 4 years right off the bat. And I guess head coaching wasn't for him because it didn't go too well over the 4 years in Jacksonville. So then he slid back into the defensive coordinator role with Los Angeles Chargers over the last 4 seasons. And John, let me tell you, he's done some work with the Chargers over the last 4 seasons. He sent 4 players to a combined of 8 Pro Bowls. He had 2 seasons as top 10 defense with the Chargers, which is on the other end of the spectrum for what the Raiders have been doing, honestly. And then the Raiders have been struggling with winning the turnover game recently. Last year they had a -11 differential, which is very bad. I think they were second last in differential turnovers. And then Bradley, he had 7 of 12 seasons with 22 defensive INTs or more. And then he's had a season with 31 fumble recoveries. So he knows how to turn the ball over on defense. There is some concerns because his defense kind of allows like a rushing quarterback to dominate his defenses, but outside of rushing quarterbacks, he can hold quarterbacks to low scoring games and really turn them over. And like when I started to get down this road of the Raiders not be able to turn the ball over, I looked at how they fared last season. So you can let me know how you feel on this. In neutral turnover differential, so the team split. They were 4-1. When they won the turnover differential, they were 3-0, and when they lost the turnover differential, they were 1-7.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we know turnovers. If you win the turnover battle, you usually that has a good probability that you're going to win the game. But to be undefeated, or was you say 4-0 and 3-0, or 4-1 and 3-1, or 3-0?
So they would have been 7-1 in games they were even or won the turnover differential, and then 1-7 in games they lost the turnover differential.
Okay, so that's not, yeah, that's not terrible, but I mean, when you consider the fact that they don't really turn the ball, like Derek Carr is not a quarterback that really turns the ball over, and and the fact that, I mean, I don't know how Josh Jacobs or the running backs or the team did in terms of fumbles, but can't remember that being much of a real problem for the Raiders in the last couple of years. So that just really speaks to the deficit of the turnovers that the Raiders are getting on defense, or they have on defense. So Gus Bradley, I mean, I completely forgot, overlooked that he was, coming over the defense as a defensive coordinator. And when you look at what he's done in San Francisco or San Diego, that was then become LA. He's, like you said, phenomenal job, 2 seasons at top 10. And this is a defense that has struggled over the years. We talked about the Chargers in our first segment of the AFC West that struggled over the years with just injury after injury after injury. And a lot of those injuries have come to the defensive side of the ball that they've continued to over the last 4 years, whether it's guys like Derwin James missing times, guys like Joey Bosa, guys like Melvin Ingram. They don't have a middle linebacker that you could speak of. I mean, they've been able to still be productive on that side of the ball. Let's talk about the quarterback situation, right? Because we obviously we mentioned Derek Carr, that the Raiders, there was talks that the Raiders are trying to get up into position to draft a quarterback potentially. Even last year, the Raiders were involved. No one really knows how much, with the courting of Tom Brady. So, there's two straight off seasons where the Raiders were actively trying to replace Derek Carr, but he had his best season under John Gruden yet in 2020, completing 67% of his passes, which, the lowest completion percentage he's had under Gruden, but the yards were up at 4,100 yards. That's a career high, 4,103. And the touchdowns were 27, interceptions were down at 9. So also added 140 rushing yards to go with 3 touchdowns on the ground. Was the QB 13 last year, Marcel, but this year, according to 4for4.com's multi-site ADP, he is going off the board as the QB 25. What are your thoughts on this price for Derek Carr?
Um, at quarterback 25, like he's going to deliver like above ADP. He hasn't finished outside of the top 20 in terms of ADP or like the season end finish in his career. So at that price, if you're in a 2 QB league, you got to scoop him up in the top 20s for sure. He's only been a QB 20 twice of all his seasons. I think he's played 7 seasons now. So he's definitely you get value there, and nobody wants to take Derek Carr because he's not a sexy name. He's not a rushing quarterback. He doesn't bring you, I mean, sky high 30 plus point games, but he's just going to be a steady chugger on your team, filling that super flex spot that you can get late and you can fill up on other players earlier in the draft. And then if you're in a single quarterback and you're one of the people who punt the position in the single quarterback redraft leagues, I mean, Derek Carr starts the season off bad, so I'm not saying to draft him to start the season because he has 5 really tough matchups. But he's a guy that you can take, you can grab him on waivers down the stretch, and he's going to perform for you down the stretch this season. So it's going to be interesting. And in terms of the trade talks, I mean, yeah, they were tied with trade talks for Tom Brady, and people rumored maybe Deshaun Watson and then Aaron Rodgers, just because Vegas can bring in some pretty big names because of the city now. But until they can grab a quarterback that's better than Derek Carr, I mean, I know they've said Marcus Mariota is competing for the spot, but I mean, Derek Carr has performed increasingly well in this offense, and I'm not like nothing concerns me about Mariota taking his spot. But I mean, if you have a chance at landing an MVP, um, future Hall of Famer quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Tom Brady. I mean, it's a business decision at that point, and why not? So I wouldn't be upset because I understand that side of the ball, and I mean, we will be bringing in that would be bringing in a better quarterback, but I mean, until that happens, it's something we can't worry about, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. I mean, no sense in worrying about it until it actually happens. But I mean, obviously, if you get an opportunity to get a Tom Brady or like you said, a Deshaun Watson or um I forgot who or Aaron Rodgers, then yeah, you go and you make that happen. But I mean, and even with the quarterback situation, if you can get one of these, was a loaded quarterback class. So you got 5 first round quarterbacks and 5 guys. I've said before, I think all make it to their second contracts with their teams. So like, yeah, you try to get one of those guys, especially if you can have his, the life of his 4 or 5 year deal, it be the light, be what 2 or 3 years of Derek Carr would be. You definitely try to make that happen. So for me, am gonna, it comes down to like who are you drafting around Derek Carr, right? Because you have to make a decision, and I agree with your sentiment. Second, 2 quarterback leagues, he makes a ton of sense as a QB2. Like I think he's totally undervalued in that sense. Like there's no way Derek Carr should be going outside of these, 20. I mean, I guess since I did my notes, he's QB 24 now, but there's no way he should be going outside of this range, right? Like the questions are you going to take guys like, because Justin Fields, he's not a guaranteed starter, but he's a guy that a lot of people he has a lot of upside. He has a ton of upside, and people are kind of banking on that, right? You could kind of pair these 2 guys together. I know you're not exactly excited with the start for Derek Carr, but maybe, you try to, use Derek Carr as like a bridge to a guy with maybe some more upside. What do you think about that?
I think that's honestly like a phenomenal way to use them. And I mean, injuries happen every season. So even if you pick up Derek Carr and you got a quarterback early, let's say, and then you grab a Justin Fields, a Trey Lance, somebody that we're expecting to come in later in the season, at that point, once that rookie comes in, establishes his position on the team, his role on the team, and then plays really well for fantasy, there's going to be injuries to other teams. People are going to be looking for quarterbacks. Some people aren't going to perform. Like some quarterbacks are not going to perform as we expect. So at that point, then you have trade bait with Carr. I know it's not, like I said, it's not a sexy name, but if you can package Carr with a wide receiver to upgrade at that wide receiver position while having your stud QB drafted early and then like your Justin Fields, your Trey Lance as mentioned, I think that's a phenomenal idea. So it just comes to say that although he's not the greatest piece to have on a roster, he still brings some kind of value.
No, absolutely. And then with that 2-for-1, you've gone ahead and opened up another roster spot. So you're essentially adding 2 players there. I like that. Let's move on to something or a topic that I'm going to need you to convince me, man, because Josh Jacobs last year, I took a very anti Josh Jacobs approach last year. He was my bust for the 2021 season, and it had nothing to do with his fantasy finish and what it would be. It was more of like how he would finish, how he finished. I call him the Amari Cooper of running backs because he's going to get these really high outputs and then these really low fantasy outputs. But he was a guy again very inconsistent with the production, and now he enters a season where the offensive line is presumably worse. There's another running back in the backfield who can not only handle some first and second down work, let's call it what it is. He could, like Kenyon Drake, can actually handle lead back duties on first and second down, but he can also handle there's third down work as well. I just have my questions again. 15 games last year, 273 carries, 1,065 yards, 12 touchdowns to go along with 45 targets for 33 receptions, 238 yards. This was good enough for the RB14 in PPR points per game at 15.4. Like I mentioned, they add Kenyon Drake to the mix. He was the RB24 last year, 12.8 PPR points per game. Played in 15 games, 239 rush attempts, 955 yards to go along with 10 touchdowns and 31 targets, which turned into 25 receptions for 137 yards. Guys are going off the board as RB20 and RB39, respectively. How are you navigating the Raiders' backfield?
No, that's I know there's a lot of concern for Josh Jacobs in football this year, and I'm honestly not overly worried just because Devontae Booker actually handled a good amount of carries, a good amount of targets, and if you add those with what Jalen Richard had last year, there was 100 targets to the running back from Carr. And then Devontae Booker had 93 carries. He had 3 touchdowns on the ground. So there is work to be had for Kenyon Drake without taking too much away from Josh Jacobs. Last year, the Raiders, if you would pace it to like a 17 game to this season, to 17 games, they would have paced for 486 rush attempts, which is quite a bit. They were 19th in yard per carries last season, which wasn't too good. But they were 8th in total rushing TDs, so it shows there is some upside to be had there. Um, so all this to say about, I expect Josh Jacobs. I don't know how many people have paid attention to this, but he goes from like 18 carries, then he'll be down at 12, and then he'll have 24, 31, 28, and then he'll miss a game, and then he'll do kind of the same spree over and over. And I think bringing in Kenyon Drake allows to kind of level the playing field with Josh Jacobs and kind of cap him at the 18 carries per game instead of wearing him out because Josh Jacobs is a physical runner. He's a contact first runner. So when he has those high carry games, he isn't able to produce in the next game or even be on the field for the next game. So I think what's going to happen here is we're going to see kind of Josh Jacobs in that 1-2 role carrying. I have him projected to 275 carries again this year, which is a lot. He had 273 last year, so if you pace it out, it's slightly less per game, but I think they're going to be more consistent, and he's going to be a much more consistent high floor player than, like you had mentioned, he might have been RB7 in fantasy football, but I mean, you were not RB7 happy with him, if that makes any sense. Like he had maybe 5 games where you were really happy with him, 4 games where you're like, he did okay, and the rest they were just low floor, kind of killed you in your RB2 spot. So the way I see it is 275 attempts to Jacobs, and I was able to stat out 125 carries to Drake, which is still, I'd say it's a pretty good number for your running back too. And then I have Kenyon Drake getting 45 targets to Josh Jacobs 30 targets this season. It's down for Jacobs in the targets, but from there, I mean, I just think, like I said, he's going to be a much more reliable player this season. At RB20, I also have him statted right at ADP. I think I have him RB20 as well, but I do expect a higher finish just from the sense that somebody ahead of him is going to get injured. But again, I don't think he will have wide or running back 5, like top 5 upside, top 10 upside. I think he's kind of going to be more in your 16 to 12 ish for the running back position on the end of the season.
Yeah, and so a lot of my issues, and you made some great points about the carry distribution and how it works out throughout the season where he'll end up missing some games because he gets banged up, and he does get banged up a lot. I mean, whether it's a shoulder or a knee or an ankle or something, Josh Jacobs tends to always miss some time, and so I definitely see that, which then, like you said, will probably mean less touches for him because the 270, you have him at, you said 272 carries,
Yeah, 275 this season, and he had
275 this season, he had 273 last year. So again, you pace that out to 17 game season. He'll have less carries per game. And then you already said you have him with even less targets than last year. So the overall volume will be down. And then at the end of the day, you're going to be looking for those touchdowns for Josh Jacobs because that's how it's really going to happen. But when you look at the Raiders and you look at their schedule, not just their schedule, but their projected win total, I mean, I think the line is set at 7.5 or 8. I've got them hitting, I've got them under 7.5. So if you look at them being a 7 and 10 win team, how much positive game script is there going to be for where, like you said, I don't have them being. I think Kenyon Drake, Jalen Richard will probably end up getting a lot of that third down work because the Raiders have kind of gone to that MO of like, okay, well, we're down. Josh Jacobs is like, we're not going to use you until we get down to the goal line and we're in scoring range. So it's just one of those things that you really have to think about and really consider. Because like you said, he might be a guy who's like maybe I only want him in best ball or or maybe I get him or maybe I have him on my team and he has one of those huge 30-point games like we saw him have week 1 against Carolina, and then I just trade him first whenever I can get, because I don't know, man. I mean, convince me, man. Talk me off the ledge here with Josh Jacobs.
Oh, no, you bring up some really good points. And it's like you said, maybe he's a best ball option, but where he's being drafted, he allows you to, especially if you have that first pick with Christian, like we're all assuming Christian McCaffrey is your first pick in standard redraft, then when the board comes back to you, you can pick up wide receiver, wide receiver. Sorry, other end of the spectrum. If you get that first pick of the fourth round, you might be able to snag Josh Jacobs as your RB2 there, and that allows you to go kind of that running back, wide receiver, running back sandwich, and have a really good foundation, have two really consistent high scoring wide receivers. So where he's going, he's worth the value to me, just because I think like this is his floor. He won't underproduce ADP, abide an injury. I mean, we can't project injuries, but yeah, that's just kind of my take on it. And it's like you said, you brought up a really good point about the projected win total. Are they going to be leading games, or are they going to be playing catch up? In that sense, it makes a lot of sense to be scared to take him. But like I said, I think he's going to be more consistent. He's going to give you high floor, and if you can get him in the fourth round, I think he is worth his ADP right now. And then in terms of when they drafted Alex Leatherwood, the tackle out of Alabama, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
When they drafted Alex Leatherwood, they were talking heavily on what they wanted to do on the ground this season. They said, we can't continue to play catch up with the Kansas Cities of the league. So we got to start draining the clock, getting the time of possession on our side, and running the ball hard in the first 2 or 3 quarters to see where we're at in the fourth quarter. If we're within a 1-score game, controlling the game clock, controlling the ball, then it puts them in a position to win. And that was the reason they went out and got Alex Leatherwood, which people think was probably a reach in the draft, which I can agree. Like he was a late first round pick. So yes, he was a reach, but they went and got their guy, and I'm excited for him. I mean, he's fairly athletic, he's long, he's strong, so and he can get to the outside for the outside zone run. So I do think he does help this team, and yeah, no, I'm all in on Josh Jacobs at RB20. Like I will be taking the value and just living the life it lends me once the season starts. See what happens.
Yeah, and I say all this, and I've got him sitting as my RB19, so right one spot above ADP. So, like you said, back half of 410 in 12-team leagues according to 4for4.com. That's not a bad price for a guy that could presumably see 18 to 25 touches, and even the ridiculous touchdown production that we see him get from time to time. I'm just, yeah, I don't know. Maybe Marcel, you might have walked me off the ledge a little bit, but we'll reevaluate. But let's talk about. Okay, one last question though. What are you doing with Kenyon Drake though?
Kenyon Drake to me is like a high-end handcuff. He's not your Kareem Hunt because he's not going to get that kind of production, but he's like I don't know, your no-name brand of Kareem Hunt. Like he can come or Kareem Hunt. Yeah, yeah. So like Kenyon Drake, he can come in and he'll kind of be I know it's kind of weird to think of it this way, but kind of the Chase Edmonds of last year. I know they were teammates, and I see him getting like the 5, 6 targets a game. So if you're in those PPR formats, I mean, that's production there, the yardage that comes with it. And then he's going to get your 8, 10, maybe 12 rushes a game. So the thing about Kenyon Drake, he's like a bye-week filler, flex spot, just a guy that's going to give you that high floor with the yardage and the receiving work, but he's not going to give you those top 12 finishes on a week unless he scores a touchdown, which I only have him projected for 3 total touchdowns on the season. So yeah, if I'm picking Kenyon Drake, I mean, it's going to be in the 7th or 8th round. Like I'm not reaching, I'm not planning to take him. If he falls to me, great. And then it's a high-end handcuff at the same time because there's nobody after Kenyon Drake kind of on the depth chart that can run the ball. And we know he can run the ball. I mean, he's put up three seasons in a row of 1,000+ scrimmage yards. So I mean, he's definitely talented, and you had mentioned that at the start. So yeah, like I said, I'm not gonna reach for Kenyon Drake, but I will take him on my roster somewhere in the draft if he falls.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, like you said, he's got that built-in upside where he's probably going to have a role as a flex option in PPR leagues. But if something were to happen to Josh Jacobs, like you mentioned, he's prone to it, especially after those games where he gets a lot of work. So, let's move on to the wide receiver position. this is an interesting bunch for sure. Last year, Nelson Aguilar was the lead wide receiver, 82 targets for 48 receptions, 896 yards, to go along with 8 touchdowns. Was the wide receiver 34 in total fantasy points, averaging 11.6 PPR points per game. It's assumed that Henry Ruggs and or John Brown would fill this role that Nelson Aguilar held last year. Ruggs is definitely intriguing, being the former first round pick, obviously has the elite speed. And so naturally, we look to him to be the breakout here. He was, pretty good, honestly, last year. If you really look at the numbers, 43 targets, 26 receptions, 452 yards, and 2 touchdowns, averaged 17.4 yards per reception, and catching more than 60% of his targets. I mean, that's really good for someone who has an average depth of target of more than 17 yards down the field. John Brown has also been a good deep threat in his career. Throughout his career, has a career yards per reception of 14.8. He's dealt with some injuries recently, though, so those two are battling for that spot. And then there's also Brian Edwards, who was hyped all summer or all last year, really. Ultimately, did nothing. One story, real quick: I traded at the start of the season. I had Cortland Sutton and Deontay Johnson, and they were both injured going into that Monday night. Were really questionable, so I needed a receiver. So I had traded this running back I picked up off waivers before the season started, in James Robinson for Brian Edwards. So that was yeah, you could tell how that year one kind of went for me.
Oh, John, I feel bad for you for that one. And that would be a dynasty league, would it?
No, it was just a
Oh,
regular redraft league.
oh,
I was
even
just
worse though.
Yeah, it was worse because it was like free money.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because John, James Robinson finished, I think, running back 6 last year to Brian Edwards' poor season.
Yeah. Brian
Yeah,
Edwards
no,
did nothing. But so what let me give you the fantasy or the ADPs before we continue though. Well, Hunter Renfro, I got to talk about this guy. The guy that looks like he's been in the league 10, 15 years, but only a third year pro, was had some useful PPR weeks. Had 77 targets last year, turning 56 catches, 656 yards, 2 touchdowns. These guys are going off the board. Ruggs is the wide receiver 54, John Brown the wide receiver 64, Brian Edwards is the wide receiver 84, and then Hunter Renfro the wide receiver 94. Which of these Raiders wide receivers do you want, and are any of them currently of value to you?
that's a really good question. This is kind of your late draft dart throws at this point when you're looking at their ADPs. So I listened to a little interview with Derek Carr on Pro Football Focus, and when he was talking about the offense, he was always talking about how they want to set up their offense in a way where they have two speedsters on the outside, and that's where we saw Ruggs and Aguilar have success last year. So they want to put two speedsters on the outside. So what it does, it opens up either the run game or Darren Waller underneath or a slot receiver. So if there are only two wide receiver sets, Darren Waller has the whole like underneath of the field. And that's why you don't see a high yards per catch for Darren Waller. He's kind of sitting at the 10 and a half, 11 range. But then you see the wide receivers, both Aguilar and Ruggs were over 17 yards a catch just because that's what they're trying to do. And then it sets up Josh Jacobs underneath as well. So talking to the value this year, to me, it's Ruggs. I mean, it just came out that he put on 13 pounds, and to me, that was his problem, was kind of beating that press coverage. And they tried to use him early, beat the press coverage kind of if he's being pressed, and then run a slant and try to get him the ball middle of the field and then use his wheels to kind of gun up the field. That's how they started the season with him trying to manufacture him touches, and I think they're going to get back to that. Um, so I'm excited about Ruggs. I mean, I think he's like that's outside of a wide receiver four, and there's no way falls outside like finishes outside the wide receiver four. And then it's the upside that comes with Ruggs. What happens if he figures it out? What happens if he becomes Derek Carr's favorite target? Because last year he got hurt at the start of the season, and that's when Nelson Aguilar kind of emerged, and then Brian Edwards got hurt, and that's when it led to just more targets to Darren Waller, more targets to Nelson Aguilar, and then those guys kind of took over for the season. But now Aguilar is gone. So I think Henry Ruggs, he's the guy. But then John Brown is a close second. At 64, I'll draft him above that ADP as well. The only concern with John Brown is injuries. If you're willing to have a guy that's going to play 10 to 12. Lucky if you get 14 games out of him this season. If you're willing to leave that guy on your bench and then just play him when he's 100% healthy, you're going to get production out of him kind of in the way they want to run those wide receivers. He's going to have probably 6 targets a game, but he's going to bring that for 60, 70 yards and potential touchdown. On the same podcast that I started this off with, Derek Carr was talking about this offense, and when he was mentioning his wide receivers, he listed them Ruggs, then it was John Brown, then it was Hunter Renfro, and then it was kind of talk about them, and then it was Zay Jones, how good he is, how well he's doing in camp, and then there was talk, and then it was Bryan Edwards. It was kind of like, why is Bryan Edwards being left in the dust? Now, do I believe Bryan Edwards is a great player? Absolutely. Like, the film talks for it. He had flashes last year on his limited targets. Do I believe he fits this offense? I really do. But what's holding him back is it's Darren Waller. If Darren Waller were to go down, I wouldn't be rushing for Foster Moreau, which everyone thinks is the backup tight. Well, he is the backup tight end, but he's not the backup target getter, if that makes any sense. It's Bryan Edwards. They'll play 3 wide receiver sets. Bryan Edwards will be working the middle of the field, the shorter kind of possessional style catches, and he's more than capable of doing it. It's just when you have a Darren Waller to throw to, why are you going to throw to Bryan Edwards? Why are you going to throw to the slot? Why? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, Darren Waller's so reliable. So that's kind of my take on Bryan Edwards, and I'm hands off on Renfro. I'm hands off on Bryan Edwards for any purposes, unless one of these, like, if Ruggs goes down, then maybe I'll look into one of them, but otherwise, I'm hands off for sure.
Well, I got Renfro and Scott Fishbowl, so I felt pretty good about that. It's good wide receiver depth, first downs, half a point for first down. So, but it's probably the only time to get excited about Hunter Renfro landing on your fantasy team. But I totally agree with you about Henry Ruggs. Like, I'm not even like, I don't even consider myself like a huge fan of Ruggs. I was someone that said like I had Brandon Ayuk ahead of Ruggs in terms of like how I would have listed the wide receivers last year. And I'm like looking at because I know you do projections as well, and I'm just kind of sitting here like, if Ruggs gets 100 targets,
Man, it's like what you said. Like, he had over 60% catch ratio last year. If he gets 100 targets, we're looking at over 60, potentially 70 targets at the 17 yards per catch. I mean, that's over 1,000 yards. We're talking a really good season, and then the touchdowns that are going to come with them. I mean,
yeah.
And you kind of saw him produce touchdowns later in the season too. And then, I mean, Henry Ruggs won 3 games for the Raiders last year. I mean, and people kind of sleep on the fact, but he had a 59-yard bomb touchdown against the Chiefs, the game they beat the Chiefs.
Mm-hmm.
He had a game clinching flag against New Orleans early in the season. He just blew past the defender, pulled on his jersey, flags 50 yards downfield. That was game clinching. And then he caught the Hail Mary touchdown to beat the Jets. So he won 3 games as a rookie on, like I said, one of those 3 plays goes unnoticed because it was a flag, so there's no highlights to it, there's nothing like that, but it just shows what he brings to this team. And yeah, he's a first round talent for a reason. Yeah, we might think he's a speedster, but there's some value there's some high upside weeks to come out of it too.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. If I mean, let me just pull it up because I have it here in terms 4 for 4. This lovely ADP data, aggregated all in one place. Wide receiver 54, like I said. I mean, so like Corey Davis is probably one of the only guys I would probably take over Ruggs. I mean, Henry Ruggs has a ton of upside, but I think Corey Davis is just probably going to get more target volume being the wide receiver one over there. But Mecole Hardman is getting drafted ahead of Henry Ruggs. I mean, I talked about this with Mike Hicks yesterday when we talked about the Chiefs, but Russell Gage, Jalen Rager, like Marvin Jones, Michael Gallup, I'm taking Henry Ruggs, man, just because he has a chance here to be the number 1 wide receiver for the Las Vegas Raiders, and he was a first round draft pick, like you talked about, has the elite speed, had put on 13 pounds, like you said. So there's a potential there that he could add another element to his game. Like, had a good season last year. This is not like This is not a guy that had like, caught 46. I'm gonna, 46% of his passes like Jerry Jeudy, but I like Jerry Jeudy, not knocking him. But we're like sitting here trying to like, oh well, what happens if this happens? Like, no, this guy has the same quarterback, same play caller, is a second year in and caught 60% of his passes, 17 yards per reception. Like, no one's talking about that.
No, no, and it makes good sense. And like a lot of people, they think, well, his quarterback's Derek Carr, so like we don't want the wide receiver one connected to Derek Carr, especially when it's kind of your deep route wide receiver, your speedster, your deep threat. But last year, like there was a bunch of stats released on Derek Carr, and he was tied first with Aaron Rodgers on PFF for passing grades deeper than 20 yards. He was first in adjusted completion percentage on throws deeper than 20 yards. Yeah, he might have been 18th in ADOT, but that's because he does like to check down a little bit. He does like to hit Darren Waller, like I said, kind of underneath and stuff like that. But then, yeah, he was tied for ninth in total completion percentage. Like he had a phenomenal season, and like the moment John Gruden signed with the Raiders to be their head coach, everyone said Derek Carr is going to be in the swamps for 2 to 3 years because they know how difficult it is to learn his offense. It's kind of a reaction offense instead of actually manufacturing a guy a touch. It's kind of if the defense does this, this is what you got to do type thing. It's not we're going to get the ball to this player in this possession. So yeah, no, I'm excited for Ruggs, man. And like you said, like there was a reason they only signed Nelson Aguilar to 1 year. They just drafted two wide receivers pretty early, first and third round. So they needed some veteran presence. They needed somebody to learn from. And like they let Aguilar walk because it's time. Like they know Ruggs is ready. It's time. And that's all there is to say about it.
No, absolutely. I mean, Nelson Aguilar basically was Henry Ruggs just with more targets last year. I mean, I totally agree. So before we make this a Henry Ruggs podcast, because it's what it's going to seem like, you talked about Darren Waller. You talked about the low A dot. I mean, when you're throwing the ball to Darren Waller 140 something times, your A dot's probably going to be low. So with but he was the next best thing in fantasy last year if you didn't have Travis Kelsey.
Yeah, no,
Like,
and that's a good. Yeah, no, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off
no,
there.
you're good. You're good. I mean, if you did not have Travis Kelsey, he was the second best thing going for you at the tight end position. Was tight end two, averaging 17.4 PPR points per game, had more than 100 total PPR points. Then the next best option at tight end, and that's because the man might as well have been a wide receiver because that's what the numbers. That's basically the numbers he was putting up: 145 targets, 107 catches. 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns, all of those numbers career highs for the former wide receiver. I ask you, Marcel, going off the board as a tight end two, any reason to think he'll finish worse than that, or possibly even better?
No, that's a good question. I mean, when you look at Darren Waller, he checks all the boxes you want as a tight end when we're talking real life, like athletic freak, 600 or 6'6", 255 pounds. He's a strong run blocker, which allows him to stay on the field in any play action, allows him to stay on the field for over 85% of the snaps. Where we see a guy like Mark Andrews, he's only on the field for 60% of snaps because he's more of your pass catching type of tight end. But then like last year, he had a 20%, 26% market share, all the career highs, 74% catch rate. He had the greatest after the catch at the tight end at 576, and that was second in the league, just behind Alvin Kamara. So yards after the catch, he can manufacture them on his own, and that's why they like getting him the ball. Um, but you do bring up a good point. Will I draft him as a tight end too? And it just depends how you feel about George Kittle. I will not draft him ahead of Travis Kelsey. I just won't, just because Travis Kelsey, like he'll have the same volume, but then he will put up 5 yards or 4 yards more per catch than Darren Waller will, and that just adds up to those higher floors, higher ceilings, and all of that. And then he's also a red zone threat himself. But then, like I said, it depends what you think of George Kittle. And when I look into 2021 coming up, we don't know what's going to go on. We don't know how good Trey Lance will be. So then, do you want the exact same offense, exact same quarterback, same tight end, or do you want a tight end that's coming off an injury who has the potential to see Jimmy Garoppolo, then Trey Lance, and kind of work into Trey Lance's first season? or do you want the production of Waller? So to me, it's a no-brainer. It's Waller at tight end 2. I actually have them kind of tiered off. It's Travis Kelce tier break, Darren Waller tier break, George Kittle, and then I actually have TJ Hawkinson sliding into the George Kittle. But I know that's not related to this podcast. So as I'm saying, to me, Darren Waller is the tight end 2. He's not going to finish above. He's not going to finish below a Biden injury.
Yeah, I'm with you on the, where you place Darren Waller, right? Because like you said, it comes down to where do you have George Kittle. I think 6. Well, I actually made the bold prediction going to last year that George Kittle would be the tight end 1. That did not happen, mainly because of injuries. I just thought that they would have had no choice but to make George Kittle the target machine. But anyway, neither here nor there. Darren Waller this year was my tight end 3, just about when I put my initial set of rankings out June 1st. He was my tight end 3. George Kittle was my tight end 2. But then I started doing some more thinking and just kind of digging and, really just realized like Darren Waller was 140 something targets last year, 145 targets. Like that's absolutely absurd. Like even if George Kittle played a full season, he wouldn't see 145 targets. And yeah, George Kittle he makes a lot of big plays, but when we're in these PPR leagues, it's going to come down to I want these targets, and if I can get a tight end that's going to see, I mean, like you said, Travis Kelce saw 145 targets or 100, he saw 140 something targets, but he's going to get more yards, and so that's why he'll end up with a 1,400-yard season. But Darren Waller is still going to get those targets, and at tight end, I mean, especially in PPR leagues, I mean, sign me up. I thought I got a little excited because I thought you were going to say you had Kyle Pitts as your tight end 4. But you brought up TJ Hawkinson. If it was Kyle Pitts, we could have had a whole segment here about Kyle Pitts. But TJ Hawkinson, I'm not gonna. It's not on brand for me, so we're not gonna talk about TJ Hawkinson anymore. But I have to ask you one last question about Darren Waller.
Okay.
Going off as the 22nd player, according to 4for4.com, his multi-site ADP. That puts him as the 10th pick in the second round. Like, is that too late for you? Too early? Where is it that you're trying to target a guy like Darren Waller?
That's a good question. I put this little math equation together that kind of says like points above replacement type thing. So I have my own formula for that. And when I did the output, Darren Waller came out as the player 16 to pick off the board. And I'm one of those guys that my whole life I've kind of been the anti-early tight end guy. I've kind of always been like I'll punt it, I'll grab it in the end, and I'll figure it out as the season goes on. But then last year was the first time I experimented, and I grabbed Travis Kelce. He slid to me in the early second round last year, and I was like I can't pass this up. Let's see what happens. And I don't want to get into that season because I had Kenny Golladay out, I had Joe Mixon out, I had a Dak Prescott. It was 4 of my first 5 picks. Travis Kelce was the only of the first 5 picks that survived, and I lost in the finals just because I was able to ride off Travis Kelce. I ended up picking up Justin Jefferson off of waivers. That kind of brought me a huge boost. And then Ryan Tannehill became my quarterback. That gave me a huge boost. And then just riding off Kelce's consistency brought me to the finals. And from there, I'm like, okay, I believe it. You have to get the elite tight end. This was a full PPR league. And as you're mentioning, sign me up for those tight ends that with the 17 games are going to see 150 targets. Like that's irreplaceable. So at the player 20 off the board, I will take him. And if I'm taking him pick 208 to 2012. Like if I have a top 4 pick, my fingers are crossed the whole time until the board comes back to grab Darren Waller on the way back. So yeah, I will take him at tight end 20 or at player 20.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting conversation to have because we see, my guy Dave Gutierrez says you got to take Travis Kelce with the 101, right? So I'm like, and you see Travis Kelce, he's got a tight end, he's got an ADP of player 5, right? So to me, if Travis Kelsey, if they're the next best players, Darren Waller, right? Because like you said, you have them in a tier, right? George Kittle, it's Travis Kelsey, Darren Waller, George Kittle. How close is Darren Waller in your eyes to the Travis Kelsey tier? Like how close?
Um, it's like I said, the touchdowns and the targets and the receptions are all going to be the same. It's the yardage. So when you say how close, it's close, but it's just that gray area where I couldn't quite put Waller in with Kelsey. The only thing I've considered is the age with Kelsey, and that's more of a dynasty talk, is does he miss a game or two this season? Does he lack speed or anything like that? Like, does those yards per catch come down just a smidge? Because like when I talked about Darren Waller, leading was second in the league with yards after catch. Travis Kelsey was third, 2 yards behind. So he was right there with Waller in yards after the catch. So the tiers are very close for Waller and Kelsey, but then I can talk to the tier below when I'm talking TJ Hawkinson, or not TJ Hawkinson, George Kittle. When I'm talking George Kittle, he's kind of flirting to come into Waller's tier. So I do think there is a tier break, but if I could put it this way in my rankings, it would be 1A Travis Kelsey tier, 1B Darren Waller tier. It wouldn't be tier 1, tier 2, if that makes any sense to you. Like that's kind of how I view it, but I just can't let those tiers come together, and I don't know what's stopping me.
Yeah, I'm just thinking from a strategy perspective, right? Like there's only one Travis Kelsey, but there's only one Darren Waller. I mean, we have our questions about George Kittle. Kyle Pitts is like a projection. TJ Hawkinson. I mean, the off we're banking on targets, but the offense isn't necessarily one that's very good, or we're not expecting it to be very good. So, like, to me, is it almost worth like, hey, I'm going to pass up on one of these running backs here, right? Because like maybe it means passing up on, a Nick Chubb or Jonathan Taylor or Ezekiel Elliott or Austin Eckler or maybe even Aaron Jones, getting a Darren Waller, and then on the way back, maybe Nick Chubb fell to you, maybe Austin Eckler fell, maybe you're able to get a Najee Harris or an Antonio Gibson or a Joe Mixon even. Um, so it's just something that I think it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, no, definitely. And if I'm drafting, so were you talking there drafting Darren Waller in the first round, maybe like later
Yeah,
first round?
yeah.
Yeah. If I'm doing that, then I feel like you're kind of stuck in the I got to take back-to-back RBs now, kind of in the second and the third round. But if you're in a full PPR league, we've seen like Devonte Adams, the Michael Thomases go at the same place where Darren Waller last year saw just as many targets, just as many yards, just as many receptions, touchdowns, all that as the top wide receivers other than Devonte Adams. But if you're willing to draft a wide receiver at position 8, 9, then you should be willing to draft Travis Kelsey because the points above, or Darren Waller, because the points above replacement are better than that wide receiver you're going to grab there unless they have a Devonte Adams 2020 or yeah 2020 season. So yeah, and then the thing about Darren Waller is he's super safe. Like he doesn't miss games. He's consistent. He has high floors with high ceilings. It's just there's a lot to love there.
Yeah, I mean, and just to make your point, he would have been the wide receiver 7 last year in PPR points per game. I mean, and again, like I said off the top when we were talking about the tight end position, he had 100 more points than the tight end 3 on the season. So I don't know. I think definitely, like we're saying, definitely a conversation worth having. But one conversation I know is definitely worth having before I let you go, Marcel, is how is this AFC West breaking down? Where are the Raiders finishing? And I'll even throw in a bonus question I don't usually ask people. What happens to John Gruden?
No, those are good questions. It was funny at the start of the show when you were talking about the win totals for like the Vegas lines and stuff for what the Raiders are going to do this year. When I checked today, it was down to 7, and I dropped money on it. Like that's how I'm feeling about the Raiders because there's something about them is they will beat the bad teams they play. They will beat the 500 teams they play, and they'll compete with the top teams. It just it's kind of a crappy situation being stuck in the division they are. I mean, the Chargers are going to be great. Denver's going to have a really good defense, so if they can figure out the quarterback position, I mean, that can be a good team. And then Kansas City is Kansas City. So where do I think the Raiders? I have the Raiders finishing a half a game above the Chargers, and it's all going to come down to I think honestly, and then I think this might be also the last wild card spot between the Chargers and the Raiders. It's going to come down to the home game in LA, the Raiders versus the Chargers. Like I think that's going to decide the seasons looking at their matchups in the year. So I don't know if that's a biased opinion because obviously I'm the Raiders fan, but I do think the Raiders are going to have a good season and good or above expectations, I guess I should say. They started off the season with the Ravens, and I'm putting money for the Raiders to win that game. With the new defense, we saw Carr. It didn't matter what defense was thrown at him. Carr was consistent. The offense was consistent. It just how many possessions was the defense able to give him the ball? And then when they played really good teams, they couldn't really shut them down. And I expect this defense to kind of not be a bottom 12 defense anymore. Like Derek Carr, since Derek Carr has been the starting quarterback, these Raiders have ranked cumulatively the worst defense in the league, 32nd, which is terrible since Derek Carr's been there. So I think this is the season they start to turn things around. But the question about John Gruden is a really good question. I've heard rumors that John Gruden and Mike Mayock are so close that there's not a chance they're going to fire John Gruden. But if they do underperform, if they finish the season 7-10, 6-11, which is a possibility because they have a tough schedule, I think we might see John Gruden out of those doors. So it definitely depends on the win total. If they can hit the 8, and even if they don't make playoffs, but they're able to go 8-9, then he'll stay. So that's kind of where my line is at. And I think we'll know early because they have 5 really tough games to start the season. So we'll know where this team's going after the first 5 weeks.
Okay, yeah, I look, man, I've got the Chargers as the second team in this division. I have the Raiders finishing last, unfortunately. But hey, I've been wrong before, and for your sake, and yeah, I hope I'm wrong again. But
Oh, I
I
get it. I get it. I get both sides of the argument for sure. It's probably just a little bit of bias coming in. I try to put the bias aside, but there's just something about them that I think they're going to take a step forward on the defensive side of the ball.
it's because they're not a bad team,
Yeah.
right? They're not a bad football team. They're just they're average, and so like you said, they will compete with the good ones, but they'll win the games that they should win, but they're just average. And
Yeah.
it's like, are they going to take that step? And like they said, like you said, they very well much could. Like, right, Gus Bradley could come in, turn this defense around. Yannick Ngakoue is on the defensive side of the ball. Like, I think they've addressed the linebacker position as well over the years. So look, there's an opportunity here. But Marcel, man, this was awesome, brother. I don't want to take up too much of your time, man, but why don't you let everybody know what you're working on, and where they can find your work, man?
Oh, well, thanks a lot for having me, John. It's been a pleasure to be on here. I don't get these opportunities all the time, so I'll take them when I can. And I love the chat with you, man. It was great. People can find me on Twitter, Marcel_BFF, and that stands for B Fantasy Football. It's a little thing me and my brother have put together. He goes as Derek_BFF. If you want to follow him, he's not high in the follow count, and he's kind of more of a silent Twitter guy, but if you talk to him, like the guy he has a great brain for fantasy football. He's very unbiased, which is sometimes it can get in my way. I just love players too much, love the sport so much. It's hard not to like players. Um, we are going to start podcasting again soon. We're heading out for his bachelor party this week, and he's getting married the weekend after. So after that, we're going to buckle down and release some shows, release some podcasts, hopefully open up a website that we've been working on. And yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, that'd be great. And you can check out any of my rankings. I have them pinned to my profile for the 2021 season, along with dynasty rankings and all of that.
Well, definitely congrats to your brother on getting married. And everybody, make sure you go give Marcel a follow. Go give his brother a follow, right? If you're not going to get him a wedding present, at least you could just follow the man on Twitter, right? So go give Derek a follow as well. And definitely make sure when that website comes together, that you definitely check it out, because you'll go take a look at Marcel's rankings, but as you heard here, my man is sharp. So go check him out, go give him a follow, and definitely check out his work. But Marcel, brother, appreciate you, man. Everybody, we appreciate you for listening, And next, you will tune into the Denver Broncos, which is our final installment of the NFL divisional breakdowns. Peace, everybody.